So what are your takeaways first? And secondly, what would you say are the next steps for us in research, getting ourselves organised, advocating, whatever it may be? What do you see as the next steps? Now, as far as orders, let's go with Amy. Amy first. You okay with that? Great.
So what have I learned? I always take away the biggest messages from Danielle, you called them the GETA specials, so from the family stories and hearing and speaking with all of you guys. And it's the reminders that we need to keep working hard and we need to work harder and do more, because I think in any role we get bogged down in bureaucracy and admin and all of that kind of stuff, and that takes up a lot of our time. So this is the reminder to really shift the focus and really push what we're doing and work harder and do more for you guys. That's what I always take away from these. Next steps.
Yes.
Can I list 20, 30?
Yeah.
Every note that I've taken over the last couple of days. The biggest thing I think that has had an impact recently in our team, and from talking with families, is the addition of Briley Forster, who I don't think has been introduced. Many people have met Briley, but more broadly, is our new DE clinical nurse consultant that's just joined in our team. I mean, Briley's been working with Ingrid and with families with DEs for years, 15 years, 20 years, long time. But bringing you into our team and really embedding you in with the research team and the clinical team and the families has just changed the way we work. And I think, Emma, when you talk about, and we've spoken about this a lot, with the equity of care and just really bolstering that, I think having a DE nurse in every city, in every epilepsy care unit, that's what I would love to see as the next step.
DE nurse in every
children's hospital.
Unit, children's hospital. Is this being immediately tweeted or something?
Yeah. Putting on Kris's to-do list for tomorrow. Yeah. She'll do it too. Great, thanks Amy. Emma. So key takeaway.
Key takeaway is it's blown away by Kris's talk as the last one, and I think you had that phrase, nothing about us without us, and I think that I'm seeing a change in the tide, that is not just lip service and that is authentic, and what that means is proper funding for consumer engagement, because we know that if we want to make an impact, the system isn't working. Okay, we know the system isn't working for families with kids with DEE and adults with the DEE. So we need a seismic change, and to do that, we have to be involving you guys because you have the answers. And if we're working with you authentically, then we are so much more powerful together. And governments listen to your stories, and that we're seeing that, Mackenzie's mission, things that have been a family going and in front of a health minister and saying their story and sharing their story, and then things have changed. So that's my takeaway.
Great.
And my next thing is that can that be my next steps as well?
No.
All right. Well, I'll take a different tack, which was just thinking about your poo emoji. Okay. That I do think that the gut is a very under-recognised part of DEE, and I think that is something. And just hearing your Jenny's really powerful stories. Incredibly frustrating when there's something and we have no idea what's happening, when we see a child in pain and they can't communicate with us, and how disempowering that is. So can we do more research into that area and work together and share stories, what's worked, what's not, so we can try and use that citizen science approach and fast track to some solutions.
And you touched on the GETA specials, the 5 minutes with, that's kind of been our hallmark since GETA began, and it's really a good formula, I think, in combining what's relevant for clinicians and researchers as well as families to connect. Do you think that there's merit in perhaps doing a series of 5 minutes with for clinicians?
Oh gosh, yes.
And researchers?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of my job is in medical education, and I think every medical student needs to hear your stories, because we're saying we need to change the whole system. So if we're starting with these new trainees, and nursing, probably Erin would say this, I was getting some cards for me. She'd say the same, like, if we need to change the system by having your voices heard.
Yeah, and I mean, Mark is really far removed from a patient, but even Mark found it quite interesting to hear that patient's story. It's kind of a powerful motivator.
Absolutely.
That what you're doing makes a difference. It matters.
Absolutely. So when you've got your 10th grant rejection, and you're thinking of packing it all in and doing something, actually coming back to grounding, why did we all get into health and research in the first place? Yeah.
Great, thank you. Jenny, now can you give us your 2 things? What are your takeaways and then what do you hope?
Well, extraordinarily, I don't have a lot to add because both of you have talked about family experience, family stories, family guidance, the authenticity of hearing not only in the 5-minute presentations, which I have really loved, I think they've been fantastic, but also in the questions and in talking last night and out in the foyer. Those insights for me as a researcher are gold. They are absolute nuggets, and every single one of them is it actually informs certainly what I do and how I might speak to people in my team and involve other people. We also have quite a strong program where we do have consumer groups, and it's very powerful for anything that I do. So I really take that as the dominance of what I have learned today, this morning and yesterday. And also what strikes me is how important that dominant feature, it's your children, and how important that is to guiding the preclinical studies and to guiding the I missed the bioinformatics actually, I'm sure it guides that too, but guiding the setting up for trials and how the clinics are working in terms of networking together so that we really can run important and meaningful and trials that tell us what we need to learn from them. And I guess I have a tiny little role in that, in preparing for strong outcome measures, which is what I hope to be able to give back more and more as years go by. So that's my sort of thing. So really it's about you, but how you feed into that whole gestalt of where we are going as a community. And I would hope that us as researchers are a part of the community. So we really hope that. So that's a very, very nice thing to take away. It's lovely, actually. So that's what I have learnt, and my big takeaway. And my next steps is really how to feed that inspiration and all of those pieces of little bits of information, those nuggets, into what I do. Every day I start my day with kind of working out, which I do it the night before so I sleep better, and I and then have this big list of tasks, and they're not to do anymore, they're must do, and I get through as many as I can. And it really is my task now to bring what I have learnt in terms of experience into the funding applications, which go on and on and on and really are just interminable sometimes, but they're there, and they have you in them, and that is joyful. Even if that funding doesn't come your way, you're actually on a track that is of value and meaning. So that is important. And then all the work with trials and measures, I will be batting down on that.
Right.
Thank you.
Kris.
So for me, and it's probably a little not with my epilepsy hat on, it's with a parent hat on, is that I really, the thing that I took away is clinical trial readiness as a community. I don't think we're there, and we've got a lot of work to do in many different areas, and my next steps would be a call out to any parents who are leading groups or individuals that want to work with me on that. Email me and we'll get working.
So anyone from any genetic epilepsy who's able, willing to help you get ready for clinical trials?
Yeah, I think I'm sort of percolating in my mind, but I think it will involve regulatory people, it will involve DPAC, it'll be it'll be an evolving process, but I think it's one that needs to happen with some urgency.
And just to be clear, clinical trial readiness, what does that mean?
So, well, for me, it is having our patient groups ready. It's having our numbers. It's having a hospital that's willing to work with your patient group to bring clinical trials to Australia, because it's not easy. And I don't think that decision should fall to clinicians on their own. I think families need to have a very big voice in that, because at the end of the day, this is about saving our kids' lives. And so we need to be doing that as a team. And at the minute, as Kate mentioned yesterday, we're not attractive for industry. And it's not just because we don't have the population, it's because our processes are not smooth sailing for industry. They're expensive, they're clunky, and we've got a lot to learn from a community like the SMA community, who have managed to make forward steps. Yeah.
Thanks. Okay, now I'm going to open it up to the floor. Are there any last questions?
What's yours?
I've got lots of questions. Where do I begin?
No, not your questions.
No, your
takeaway.
Oh, my takeaways. Wow.
I was with you.
I've got lots of takeaways as well. Okay, so from Mark's session, it was really interesting to hear why does the same gene or genetic change cause different phenotypes, especially because I have 2 kids with the same gene and the same mutation, and they have very, very different phenotypes. So that was interesting to know that you're deep diving into that. And I also liked the visual, because I'm also a visual person, of the stacked books up to the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Oh, sorry, it was the Sydney Opera House, wasn't it? Sydney Opera House, very apt considering we're in Sydney. And the fact that we've only cracked 2% of the genetic material to understand 2%, and there's the 98% left. But it is interesting that 2% represents 50%, so I thought that was interesting. Amy, interesting, the multi-morbidities concept. It used to be comorbidities,
Yeah.
I'm not sure why.
Needs to be
It's
changed.
just too many, right?
Too many, and I think just placing an even level playing field on everything. So kind of up the back there, you sort of said sometimes it's sleep, sometimes it's seizures, and so the comorbidities kind of places everything else below seizures, but it's not for everyone. So,
Yes,
yeah.
exactly. And some people with genetic epilepsy, so ours, for example, SYNGAP, not all of them have diagnosed seizures.
Yeah.
So they're finding it hard to kind of connect to the epilepsy world, but they still have the DEE.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we need to make sure we're mindful of that. Also, Amy highlighted in her research, or from the research from her team, the impacts to the families or anons. We know that. So it was nice to just get that validation. We know it's anons, we're living it, but you're actually seeing it in the research as well. It was interesting to hear from Erin. And it was interesting just to hear about the hospital. I'm a little bit removed personally from the hospital process, but it was interesting to hear what goes into the hospital process and get that reassurance that there are people there that care, who would actually really go above and beyond to make sure that that process is good in hospital and then upon discharge. So I think that was really good to hear. And fantastic people to support the process. We heard from Suzanne. It took me a little while to get my ear tuned into Suzanne's accent. I needed to see her face as well because I couldn't connect. So the first minute or so, I was like, where is she talking from? But I think she was here yesterday and she's fantastic. But I really liked her message. When I did get my ear tuned in, I did get the message, and the message was positive psychology, which I think is super important, not just for us, but also teaching the clinicians how to reframe the message. Is a big one. I'm hoping she can get out to the clinicians as well, because we've all had those experiences where clinicians say, go home, like Kate Beatty was saying, go home, there's nothing you can do. That's something that I think our industry really needs some help in reframing. She also talks about hearing other, the value of hearing other patient stories, which is we all learned that as well at GETA. We also believe that there's a lot of value in hearing what other people are going through, but it also gives you some perspective. So my kids do walk around, so for me, when I see her, I hear other children that are sitting in the chair and can't get up, I feel grateful. So sure, they're in nappies and they can't talk, but they're actually moving around. So I actually have that element of perspective every time I come together and leave, and I'm sure everyone else feels that as well. Then Eden, it was really good to see Eden's little round circle. I'm like, how did she do that? And it's like, she just recorded it in a different way. I'm like, wow, that's so impressive.
She's very IT savvy.
Small things impress me. But what I thought was really interesting was GETA. And look, I've got some questions for you, and in fact I might just launch into them quickly now while we're talking about it. I'm just wondering how, it looks amazing, GETA, but how is it sustainable?
It's not sustainable.
And scalable?
It's not. So it's a pilot, and talking about the grants, okay, we put this through so many grants and no one wanted to fund it. No one wanted to borrow it because of this one. It's not sustainable. We have funding from a philanthropist, and the point is to try and gather the evidence of the need. And then it's about what are the most key elements of that we could think about making sustainable. And a lot of that's going to be partnerships, and Epilepsy Foundation and what they're doing is amazing and brilliant. But it's also just for the first time trying to track, which is why there's these embedded surveys, how much time you're spending looking, how much that's contributing to distress, and whether collating some information and maybe showing you a pathway of how to keep up to date is in itself helpful and makes a difference, because then we can try to go for better funding and more sustainable approaches.
Okay, so it won't be the exact model, but it'll be...
in my ideal world, it would be, and if I could get the government to say... And interesting, you made a comment about new roles. I saw a presentation about how health is going to change over the next 50 years, and a medical information specialist wasn't recognised as a new role, nursing, allied health, and a medical information specialist, because I think that health empowerment is a big key message that we're learning. So maybe we're not too crazy.
But it's also informing other projects as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then going back to my little takeaways, Eden had a quote on the screen that we are drowning in information but starved for knowledge. So I saw a few people pull out their phones and take a photo of that. I think it's quite powerful because we almost need people to curate us and navigate us through this wealth of information. We have it all, we just don't know what's relevant. So that was interesting from Eden. Nat, I really think that vision of you standing up next to every scientific conference, like AES I go to whenever it's on. I went to AES a few years ago and the years before. I would love you sitting inside and just typing up or speaking about what it all means. So I think your role is amazing, and perhaps there'll be many more of you in this new structure. But it was good to hear from you about Dr. Google. We know about Dr. Google, but how bad Dr. Google really is, and the fact that Dr. Google likes to give the worst case scenarios and make sure you look at reliable websites and sources of information. Ursula, we heard from Ursula. Thank you for your powerful story. It actually just did move me, so I was a little bit shocked when I had to come and talk after you. It was quite powerful to hear your story. Thank you. Cheryl, we heard from Cheryl. Thanks for telling us all about New South Wales, the Epilepsy Foundation here in New South Wales, and the infrastructure that they've set up. So there's a lot of good resources there for local parents and indeed nationally. And lastly, Kris, always great to hear you talk with any hat that you might have on the day, but particularly today, it was good to hear about what you're doing, representing us and our families at the Epilepsy Foundation. And the big takeaway from your talk was the "nothing about us without us" quote, which you're a fierce advocate for consumer involvement in any research, and I think that you encapsulate that with your one quote. That were my takeaways. They were longer than everyone else's. I'm sorry, but I did make notes. I just wanted to thank everyone. Was there anything else anyone wanted to raise on the panel, or any questions from the audience that you wanted to ask Pam or anyone else?
I suppose the last 2 days have been amazing. The thing that became really apparent to me is that we're still so disparate in all of the information that we're getting, and it does, and Kris, to your point, we are still all kind of running our own races. I even just look at the fact that between our STX families, we had one child that was diagnosed here at Sydney Children's, and our daughter was diagnosed in Westmead. And between those two hospitals, there was no communication that there was another child who was there, and it was our physio who actually recognised that the two girls had similar symptoms and had said, "Hey, what's your condition?" and then was able to connect it. But during that time, there was no connection or ability for us to actually communicate with one another and trade stories and understand what options there were in that space. How do we get the communication happening in a better methodology so that we can try and work towards the end goal together, rather than being so separate in all of our journeys?
Yeah. I'm happy to speak a bit about that. So just on your point, across the network, you know, and how embarrassing is that, but how real that is. So we've currently got a project that we're running called Gene Start, and the neurologist is allied with a project that the neurologist is doing called NeuroConnect, and it's the fact that at the moment our genetics databases are not consented. So when you do a genetics test in New South Wales, there's no bit that says I'm happy to share de-identified information. So that we're stumbling at that first block, whereas the rest of Australia, your consent form does have that now in. Okay, so New South Wales is different. So for me, that was a huge problem because it meant I couldn't actually connect up families kind of almost legally. But also, if a trials company came or a researcher came, I couldn't let them know how many patients I had with that, you know, with that variant or that gene. And also, if I had a patient with a variant of uncertain significance and I wanted to email a researcher overseas to ask them, hey, could you look at functional studies as well? I didn't have a framework for that. So we went through a year of ethics and governance, and we now have that in place. We're just rolling that out. So I can let you know more about that. But essentially, that is a short consent form, which then gives me permission to store your child's information in a de-identified way that could be of use for other research. So, for example, the natural history studies that we're talking about is an idea that it'll be a framework across Australia to bring numbers together, because exactly to Kris's point, that if we want to make ourselves attractive to clinical trials, we need to know how many numbers are. But also there's that huge missing piece of letting families connect up with other families and know it, because that shared knowledge cannot be underestimated. So it's just a little step forward that we're trying to do, because we saw this as a huge issue. So
is that's as a geneticist, that's a data privacy clause that you put in some paperwork for the patient?
Yeah. So it's a specific ethics approved project. We had to get through our governance to be able to say that we could share that information in a de-identified way.
How do you scale that to every other lab or geneticist in Australia?
And really clinician as well, because, you know, look, we've got all of our neuros, but the neuros aren't talking to one another. We've got, you know, our allied health professionals not talking to one another. So how do we get this scaled across all of these areas?
Because we're talking about integrated care. We're talking about care that is not in silos, and we're talking about not having to go to the emergency department and retell your story every single time, and to go through 10 doctors to get to the specialist retelling your story. And this is a huge issue across DEEs and rare diseases in general, and it needs a whole of system change. And I'm not saying I've got the answers. We've got certainly some thoughts in this area, but I'd love to work more on that, you know, because this has to change. You know, it has to be that when you go to hospital, there's an alert that comes up, so that the most pertinent things about your child's system are there, and we are seamlessly connecting everyone, so that's a package of care. Yeah, we know other services have done it. Childhood oncology have done it, so it's not insurmountable. It's just a new way of thinking and really working with health services and policy change. Yeah.
And the Centre for Research Excellence, we're sort of we've established this Australian Paediatric Neurology Network as well. So I'm really hopeful. We've only been established maybe 6 months. So we had our first meetings, all-day symposium last year that was bringing all of the researchers working in DEE in Australia, all of the neurologists, all of the bioinformaticians and the scientists together to talk for one day about your families and your children, and about what are the next steps and things that are happening.
How many families are in that room?
So, good point. That was the missing. That was the missing link.
It was your first time.
That was the first.
You've got to learn.
We've got to get momentum going, and we're slowly getting momentum going. But we need buy-in from the neurologists and everyone else as well.
Yeah.
So we're scrounging together funding to support neurologists in each state to refer families to the natural history study and to let us know when they have families diagnosed with different conditions as well. And so I have hope that as we have more meetings and do get together more often, that hopefully clinicians will talk and say, yeah, I have a family with that gene as well. And also, yeah.
Yeah, we really need transparent ways of doing that. And it's not for everyone. There are some people that, you know, in that initial grief, they don't want to connect up with families. It's not their space, so it has to be tailored to you. So it's choice and it's dynamic. And you know, people say, "Well, how come I can get an app and it tells me, you know, when my groceries are coming, but I don't know when my genetic test results are coming?" You know, there's so many whole of system changes that we need to do. We've got to start somewhere. But by hearing that experience, and you know, equity is a huge issue. So if you are a family out in rural Australia, you know, the chance that you've got a paediatric neurologist close to you, or a paediatric neurologist who's interested in epilepsy, you know, so it's got to be a hub and spoke, harnessing telehealth, all of those opportunities that the pandemic has opened up. We'll get there, but only with you guys. And yeah, that's what my thoughts are. I should be quiet.
I'm making notes because next steps.
I just want to actually ask a question around data management, and like we talked around, you know, clinicians hopefully being able to, through the CRE, connect patients. But globally, there's a big shift for ownership of information about our children to be owned by the families, and they're the ones that share that information. And I'm just wondering how that's being included in the CRE and other, you know, NeuroConnect and pieces like that, and how we actually can shift the dynamic, because I guess at the minute, falling behind is not necessarily the way, but we are not doing it in the same way as other countries are. And it kind of means that we're left out of research when it comes to our genes, our specific genes, because we're not able to provide our children's information because we don't have control over it. And there's also, on top of that, I think, being able, particularly having a young adult, is when we transitioned out of children's, that information is lost because we can't take it with us. There's no connection to the adult. Well, there's a whole range of issues around transition. But yeah, I'm just curious about how we, again, together can sort of shift that, I guess, and align that with what's happening in other places, so that as families, more so in specific genes, are not missing out on being part of that global community.
Can you talk to the CRE?
I think data ownership is a huge issue, and we need to learn how to do it. I don't think internationally they've figured it out yet either. I think they're working through it, but I'd love your input as to learn more about what you're hearing. There's so many people, there's so many stakeholders that are involved in this that makes it hard as well. And historically, medical research and research has been done a particular way, not the right way. And we need to change that, but we're sort of stuck with a lot of systems that are from that era. We're developing a new database, new software, new ways to collect and store information. And one thing that we do want to do is have a summary output of what information have we collected on participants that have joined our research, and what can we feed back. So if there are assessments that are happening as part of the research, neuropsychology assessments or neurological assessments, we do want to share that back to the families and the treating teams as well. So yeah, that's why we want to change what's happening. It's getting funding for that too. That's never, funded by, it's not attractive to funded bodies.
But globally there is this movement too, it's called the FAIR and the SHARE principles, which is about that data should be used for the good of everyone, and it's not someone's property. Okay, it's shared for the good of the family and for the good of the child. And a tiny thing is, as a geneticist, if I have an undiagnosed patient and the genomic data is in one particular lab and I get the family's consent, I can share that data readily with researchers around the world. Another lab block me doing that. So even in Australia, so because there's different approaches to whose data that is, to me it's the families. It's their child's genomic information, and if they're telling me they would like that shared to try and get more answers, then I
What
think.
does the Australian law say? Is it who captures it or who it pertains
It's
to?
a work in progress, but one of the priorities for Australian Genomics is working on this data sharing issue, which will now become Genomics Australia. They've just changed around because they've become part of Department of Health.
Overnight they changed.
Pretty recently.
Can I make a comment there? Because I actually did a pilot for Citizen where I actually went and got all our data from all the hospitals my daughter had been in, all the EEGs, MRIs, every single scan she could possibly have, and it all went into this one system. And to see that and to be able to share it with anyone I wanted to was absolutely incredible. And we actually had she dislocated an elbow, and we were in the hospital, and the orthopaedic surgeon thought that it was already there and we just never picked up on it. And to be able to go into Citizen, pull up an x-ray we had from as a baby of her elbow to show that it was never dislocated was so powerful. And it helped a lot. And it was an amazing system, and if we could have something like that here, it would be absolutely amazing for families.
Because you're dealing with so much already. To deal with bits being lost, someone not scanning something properly. I mean, come on. We're 2022. It should be just seamless.
We don't have access to a lot of these things unless you're one of these people. And I know I heard from Steve the other day, Steve Hill, who said he doesn't leave anywhere until he gets a copy of his reports. I mean, that is smart. I wish someone had told me that 12 years ago, because we've lost a lot of our data. So it's not even stored anywhere. It's not that you just can't access it. You don't even know where
Which
where
is
it
a waste and a risk.
Yeah.
You know, as you said. It's,
like I'm a bit like Steve. I had folders of the information, but there was some information I didn't have, like the scans. So I went to the hospitals, took a disc, got it. Cost a bit of money to do it, but it was so worth it. So worth it.
And you shouldn't have to do that. That should be an electronic
No, but it was
assistance on
part of a pilot, and it's definitely worth it. And I just wish that we had something like that for families, because we changed care from one hospital to another at 6 months in the same network and couldn't get our information from one hospital to another. And had I have had that then, it would have been so amazing for our new neurology team to have access to everything, and they didn't have it.
Well, it speaks to that integrated care as well, doesn't it?
In Brisbane, the ED system doesn't even, the Children's Hospital doesn't even connect to the hospital system. So he's diagnosed in that hospital, and every time we go to ED, I have to tell, it's KCNQ.
Look it up.
Like 50 million times, and he's on the system. He was there from 3 days old for the first 6 weeks of his life, diagnosed there, and they're like, "Oh, I'm really sorry. It's just we can't access the records from the ED system. It's a separate system, it's separate software." And I'm like, that's insane.
That has been advantageous though, because I could get all my EEGs without having to go through Freedom of Information.
What do you mean?
So we're able to go to the hospital and get all our EEG, all Will's EEG tracings for his whole 20 years directly from the EEG department. I didn't have to go through Freedom of Information.
Which you would have had to do if it was centralised. Is that what you're saying?
It's a side point, but
Silver lining.
I was just going to say, isn't the whole idea of My Health Record about owning your own health data and sharing that where you need to? Is there not something you could tap into that, an extension of that beyond the GP service?
My health record's only as useful as what people upload into it.
So you're saying hospital systems, GPs don't input information into My Health Record, is that true?
Well, it's not very easy to, you can load up a shared summary from GP land, but it's yet another thing, in an already massively
In your
overstretched
10-minute
system.
Yeah.
And then I try to do it, but it's difficult, and then some patients get a bit funny about it, and it's a very scaled, it's like their main diagnosis, their medications, their current addresses, stuff like that. But no, it's not like it doesn't pull from our GP software automatically. So we have to manually load up a summary, and it doesn't take long. It maybe takes 2 minutes, but if you've got 15 minutes per appointment, and you do that every time, and it's just going to keep generating a new document. So it's not well utilised. no, it's not easy to you can do it, but you have to, I suppose, as a patient, ask your GP to load that stuff up specifically. You know, actually say, please, can you load up a summary because the medication's changed onto my health record, and maybe be a bit proactive in asking for that.
Show of hands, who's used my health record?
Is it not sort of more like, should we just put pressure, you know, like yourselves, on the government, like holding them accountable essentially, and putting that pressure on them to say, we as a group that have children with such complex needs are going to potentially miss out on life-saving treatments, as you say, because of your shortcomings. Like, you know, and just put that pressure back on them, just continually hold them accountable to actually do something, you know, that's to them. I think nothing. It's a signing of something, or
would their answer be
for us, it's huge.
Would their answer be my health record? Would they say, look, we've got something?
Yeah, and that's
it's just not.
So then it's making the argument that it's not fit for purpose at the moment and what needs to be tweaked, rather than starting a whole new system.
Yeah.
And it's knowing how to be to lobby for change, and that's to Kris's point that as a partnership, we're so much more powerful.
Yeah, I think some of that lobbying, like Emma said before, is it does have to come from the families, because sometimes, you know, the emotive story is the one that gets it across the line, and, you know, we find a child who will miss out on clinical trials or a treatment in Australia, and we put them in front of them. Unfortunately,
or frankly dies, you know, which is what, or frankly has died, you know, because of this inequity.
Yeah.
Kris, for the critical group, is it worth just giving 1 minute on citizen, do you reckon? Or?
Knock yourself out.
Yeah, so I'll just very quickly speak on that. So what Ursula's spoken about is citizens now called GETA, they've been brought out recently. And very, very quickly, as has already been discussed, all your records would go into that. And it actually forms part of a natural history study. So for groups that don't have natural history studies, partnering with GETA can be a very cheap or free and quick way of kicking that off. The second, so there's sort of two big outcomes for the families of that. One of them is no matter where you go, no matter which doctor you go to, no matter where you are in the world, you can give a login for your care provider to see, you know, all your records. And I have St. Ursula, everything, x-rays, you know, neurology reports, blood tests, everything's in there. The second thing is you can opt in to allow researchers to have access to the data, and you know, for the natural history study is a big one, and for as clinical trials come up. So it's a really great platform. We've been on calls recently about trying to get it happening in Australia, and there's some resistance to it from certain places, but you know, I would say to anyone who would be interested in it, at least look it up and speak with your person.
Our letter, key thing to do is running that in many countries around the world, not Australia.
Yeah, so
I wonder how we can...
You can join the calls.
Actively trying to get into Australia.
So, yeah, it sounds like it will be great. The problem right now is it's hard to get the medical records in Australia, and it's not available for every condition. They're going to do a pilot, I think, for a few conditions, and then they'll aim to scale it up. In Invitae.
It's INVITAE.
Like the gene genetics.
Yeah,
so Invitae, they bought out Citizen.
Right, I don't know, that's right.
And so they also do whole genome. So this is a real benefit, right? If they do whole genome sequencing, and that can be applied to your profile, and then when clinical trials come up and the researchers want that, it's just all there. It's amazing. I just don't know why the reluctance is to...
They use AI technology to analyse correlate data.
And the other advantage, I guess, from a patient group's perspective is with Invitae / Citizen, is that as if people consent, the information, so a family would be referred on to the patient group as well. So they need to consent to that. But as they're diagnosed either through Invitae or enter the natural history study, let's put that in inverted commas, because it's not anything like what Amy and her team are doing, they will then be connected into the patient group. So it's actually a quite well-rounded process. It's just not, like Steve said, there's some resistance and some processes that we need to work through to make that
we're not set up for it to be seamless in Australia.
No, and that's part of the conversation. So.
But the other side is we give a lot of information. That's a very powerful and valuable commercial tool as well. So we just need to be cognizant of that as families too. There's a lot of benefits for families, but there's, there are other things to be cognizant of.
And just to highlight, because Kris, you mentioned that's really important, and obviously we're still developing what we'll be doing in Australia, but to say that will be face-to-face psychology assessments, neuropsychologist assessments as part of the natural history study.
Which
so
that would not have
depth. Yeah,
exactly.
But we need as many solutions and as well together.
I do think there's a solution where we combine the two, where we've got the data from a citizen in the TAME method, and then you've got the clinician that's adding to it. Yeah,
and I think a big thing with the natural history study is, as Amy said, is how we get that information back out to families, so that if you're giving your time to have a neuropsychologist assessment, that goes back to you as a family, so you have that information for your allied health support and AS applications.
So that's one of the benefits of the system. It is currently set up patient-centred, so the patient does get the data immediately. So we just need to make sure it's good data that's had a clinician input to it, otherwise it's not going to be accurate. Any other questions before we wrap up? I'm conscious some people might need to head out.
Just a quick question. Can you give me a sense of the amount of funding that goes to DE projects versus non-DE research? Like, what is it like, say, cancer and the other stuff?
Get us started.
You really want to know relative to the population size?
Yeah, it's a percentage, some sort of thing. Because what I'm hearing last 2 days is we've got so many people who, health professionals like yourselves want to do so much good, but you said 10 grants being knocked back is not, it's normal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got 10% success rate with grant?
That's look, I think this was a big thing that came up on that round table, is that we have a kind of a marketing thing, like we can't even say DE. So getting the message across that this, how important the need for urgent research in this area is something GETA have been advocating for, but you get a lot of brick walls, don't you? And it's probably starting to change, but it is not. It is much. There are other areas of medicine it's much easier to get funding for because it's very visible and easily understood. So it's about that message of getting the community to understand. It is
a good analogy, and it's not in research, but it's just allocation of resources. Is I can't remember if it was you, Ursula, but a family relayed that they ended up on the cancer ward instead of the neurology because that's where a bed. And there was like 3 fridges, there was people everywhere, the services were completely different. And it's not a us versus them, but it's just traditional. We just need to make more noise to shift the equity across.
So you get better integration, better quality of care if your child had cancer as opposed to the
They had food on the ward, they had washing machines, it was incredible.
But also you get an oncology nurse that follows you around and supports you through that journey. And it's, to me, I get frustrated and angry, but it's actually then it's turning that to, okay, well, they've done it, so let's learn from them and find out,
Take that lesson. One more question, and you're going to wrap up.
Yeah, it's more just a comment. If it's a marketing issue, what do you need us then as parents? What would you like us to do? Would you like us to talk to our local MPs? Where to from here?
Good question.
I think we, from my mind, is that we need to come up with some priorities and then take them to members and to the new health minister. And it's across a whole lot of things, like we were talking about, and someone mentioned NDIS. So we've been working on that as well. But I think we just need to be conscious that we need to have the same messaging and it be gene agnostic to get legs, and then genes can work on their own specific needs. But I think there's so many common things that we can prioritise, like access and sharing data and clinical trial processes, access to services that we don't have, like can we get, let's say, 10 nurse coordinators in all the paediatric hospitals in Australia. It's not a big ask. Breast cancer has 55. And the fact that I can reel that off is...
they're proud of it. They tell you.
Yeah, and it's great for them, but we need to, not us versus them, but we need to just show that and work out what our priorities are as a collective group. I don't think any one person or group or advocacy should be making that decision. I think we need to make that decision together, what the priorities are.
So I think maybe the next step is that we'll take it away to GETA and we'll come up with a list of priorities perhaps, and it'd be good to do a call out. I haven't done one yet for skills in the audience and whoever's watching the video. If you've got certain skills, maybe you're a marketer, maybe you're good at social media, maybe you're a digital person, maybe
government relations.
Whatever skills you have that you think could benefit the community, please can you reach out to us and let us know, because it'd be great to pull our resources.
And can I just suggest, when you sort your priorities, that you consult with the bigger group, so that you can say, we consulted with X hundred, and it gets the priorities right, but it's got the power of the method.
Yeah. Quick comment, Danielle. So CP Research Network does this really well, and CPA does this really well, consulting parents. And I think if we could follow that model, that would be great.
Is it CP Achieve? Is that
CP Alliance?
CP Research Network, which the local CP Research Alliance is kind of affiliated with. So CPRN is a US based, but they do an excellent job.
And Nadia Badawi, who's at Westmead, is incredible. And you know, she told me she has a chair in CP research where she has the remit to do whatever the families tell her is important to do. How brilliant is that? Yeah.
Wonderful. Now I think we're gonna wrap up. Thank you